It was, how do I keep my business successful without losing my family?
Right. Right. To be honest.
It's like, well, that's right. Let's start by changing the order of priority. How do I keep my family without my business crashing? How about that?
But so you did everything from sort of relationship counseling to strategic business.
Absolutely. Which was all stuff I had been doing anyway, but I wasn't like, I got to do just this or just that or just this. It was, if I talked to you and we would talk about, I had a lot of coffee conversations, like just sitting down with somebody 15, 20, half an hour and being like, what's going on in your world? What's up? And then, is there a way I can help you with that? Or, you know what? I think there's a way I can help you with that. Would you be interested in talking about it?
Right.
And doing that, I didn't have a system. I didn't have it. It was just, this is what I fell into.
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition, a podcast about making the most of the changes we're given. As a married father of 3 teenagers, a longtime global business executive and adventurer, I've been through hundreds of transitions in my life. Many have been difficult, but all have led to a depth and richness I could never have imagined. You'll get to hear all about them on this podcast so that together we can create more love and joy in our lives, no matter what transitions we are going through.
Welcome back to another episode of Life in Transition. I'm really excited today to have Joss Willard with us. And Joss is an Army vet, an amateur historian, aspiring great looper. I had no idea what that was. He'll tell us a little bit later, I think. Father, husband, and outstanding businessman and coach. And I'm really excited to have you here today and to hear more about your transitions from some very interesting things. The only one I'll drop here is the office camping. But I look forward to hearing about your story, Joss. Most welcome.
Well, thanks. It's good to be here, Art. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So jumping right in, you know, the main question that I usually start this podcast with is, what would you consider one of your most high impact, most difficult, and most meaningful transition that you've been through in your life?
I think I've been through a bunch, right? We decided we should retitle the show "Life is Transition."
Right.
I think when we talk about the most difficult, it would be the divorce. And I think that's also the one that probably is most relatable to most of the listeners. And so, let's dig into that one. My ex-wife will love that.
Well, yeah, let's hear about that, because it is something a lot of people go through, especially successful business guys, right? That they're paying more attention, unfortunately, sometimes to their work than they are to their relationships. Don't have any idea how that is true with your situation or not. But yeah, what was that like? What was the realization that that this thing that you thought was going to be forever is not going to be forever, and that you have to make a change?
Well, the realization probably happened when she was supposed to go on a trip with her sisters and her mom, and it was the Thursday night or Wednesday night or something, and she was going to go meet her sisters, and then I got a call from one of her sisters saying, "Hey, I'll come pick her up tomorrow morning." I was like, "Really?" I thought she was already there. And that wasn't like, she wasn't off doing anything terrible. I'm, not casting aspersions on her character or anything, but of course I went into the, where are you? What's going on? Eventually she called me back, and basically the conversation was that she just didn't feel like she was safe in the relationship. Not physically safe, like she was fine there, but we had this thing where we had a lot of financial ups and downs, as you do when you're an entrepreneur, and all that kind of fun stuff. And it had just, I have to think about this a little bit, how I want to say this, but basically,
take your time. It's fine.
Basically, fundamentally, what seems to have happened from my perspective is her mother was adopted and had an interesting mother of her own. So my ex-wife's grandmother. And the entire time that my ex-mother-in-law was married to my former father-in-law, she had her mother in her ear saying, "I just don't think you're happy. I think you could do better. I think you could be." And that led to all sorts of marital problems for them. And eventually they wound up getting divorced. And so my ex-wife went through that. And then unbeknownst to me at the time, the entire time we were married, like when I showed up in Canada and we were dating and it was cool, it was this great romantic thing. Oh, here's your man who's come from another country and all this stuff. But as soon as we got married, her mom was basically repeating that pattern and in her ear saying, "I just don't think you're happy. I think you could do better. I'm worried about," like, all that kind of stuff. And that sort of, I think that sunk in. And she and I had often joked about, if we had met each other in high school, we would never have hung out. We would have gone, "Nope, not interested in you. You're a different."
And why was that? Why would you not have hung out at that time?
I think it was the way that we looked at different things, how we reacted to different things. She belonged to a different group of people. Like when I was a kid, I grew up in small town Alaska. Now, for Alaska, it wasn't a small town, but for anywhere else in the world, it was a small, right? We had
Right.
118 people in my graduating class in high school, which was one of the bigger high schools in that part of Alaska. She grew up in Abbotsford, British Columbia. I don't know how many, there were 1,000+ kids in her high school, that kind of thing. And I was one of those kids that wasn't in the ultra cool group, but I also had decided that I wasn't going to be in that outcast group. Right.
Right.
So I just kind of look at things. And so me and some friends, we kind of formed our own cast. And as people were kind of falling out of the popular group,
Right.
we would reach out and kind of say, hey, you know what? We like you. We can get along and come hang out with us.
Welcome
And some
to
of
our
my
group,
friends,
right?
yeah, some of my friends were social butterflies. They could go up and down and around and around. But I wasn't. I was more of an introvert. I had my friends. I was also that guy that people would ask for advice, people that you wouldn't expect, people that would call you from other towns, people who were in the ultra cool kids would be like, hey, Joss, can I talk to you for a minute about something? I'm like, sure. You're not going to like bulldog me into the lockers or something. What can I do for you? Right. So I had a weird thing. She was firmly in the popular kids group.
Right.
Right. And in the popular, well, I don't think she thinks that, but she was in a popular kids group.
Right. Right.
And I don't know a whole lot about her high school life and everything, but we quite often she would say, I saw this, and she would talk about someone who was kind of a dork or geeky or something when she was in school, and I'd be like, I know that guy. That was one of my, like, not hers in particular, but I was friends with that guy, right? And so it was just kind of that sort of thing. And we never saw that as a warning sign. We always just kind of say, look, isn't life interesting?
Right. Right.
But in retrospect, it was kind of we don't look at life exactly the same way. Fortunately, we have a pretty good relationship now. So spoiler warning, we do okay. We have 2 kids together. One's 19, one's 15, both boys. And, we mostly, it was for the sake of them that we came back to having a decent relationship. It still got its rocky patches here and
How
there.
old were they when you got divorced, Joss?
Anthony was 4, Liam was 08, and we separated in towards the end of 2010.
Okay, so they were young.
Yeah, they were young. Yeah, so 2 and
Okay.
8, or no,
Yeah.
2 and 6,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that was tough on them, and that led to some other challenges and problems later, obviously. But one of the big things that she told me retroactively, looking back, like when we first were going through the divorce, it was not pretty. It wasn't like drag people to court and scream at each other, and it wasn't one of those vindictive hatred things. But she told me that she was absolutely convinced that I was smarter than her, and that if she didn't absolutely protect herself, I would just wipe the floor with her.
In some sort of emotional, mental way.
Yeah, yeah. Like, well, like going through the divorce, like that I would win everything. That I would wind up, I'd take her kids, I'd take her house. She'd be living in a cardboard box on the street. And I'm like, why would I do that? That makes no sense. And she admits, like, it made no sense to think that way, but that's
what was going on with her.
Yeah, that was what was going on in her head. So she was very defensive at that point, and she was also going through. It's a thing that I've noticed, and I used to do a fair amount of relationship counseling and coaching. There is a point somewhere between 3 and 6 months into an ending of a relationship, particularly a divorce, where the woman, assuming it's a male-female relationship,
right,
where the woman will go from the man's perspective, it looks like she's going a little crazy. From her perspective, it's more like she's finding herself. She's enjoying life. She's enjoying
for herself. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Living her life. Yeah.
Yeah. And she went through that point, and she was very sort of secretive about it and defensive about it from me, in part because she thought I would use it against her. Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Not because we had any history of me being vindictive or anything like that. I think it's that she knew this had been her decision to end it. I also made the decision in that I didn't fight to keep it very hard. Right. We just sort of had both realized, you know what, I think this needs to happen, as much as it sucks for everybody involved. But I think because of that, she felt a little bit of, whether it was justified or not, some sort of guilt. And she felt like maybe I would feel that I would be, let me take it back. I think maybe she thought if she was in my position, she'd be pissed and vindictive.
Oh, okay. Okay. Right. Yeah. And quite frankly, I mean, neither of you have been through divorce before, and it's new territory, and you don't know how people are going to behave, right?
Exactly. So because of that first year was not at all good. She did a lot of circling the wagons, bringing the friends in, that kind of stuff. And me being an introvert and focused on other things was like, hey, you know what? Fine. I took most of the debt, left her with the house and the kids and child support. And that was fun.
And is that the time when you had or must have been a little bit later when you had this office camping that you talked to me about earlier?
Yeah, I slept on, I was technically homeless for probably 3 years, maybe
Wow.
4.
And it was right after the divorce, or was it a little bit later?
It was during and after. So
Okay.
so we separated in 2010, and in Alberta, the law is you have to be separated for a year before you can even file for divorce. So 2011 is when we started looking at filing. You can in Alberta file for divorce without a lawyer. It has to be an amicable divorce. So we had to try and figure that out. She wound up with a lawyer for a little bit who happened to be one of the leaders at our church that we had gone to together. So that was a little awkward. But long story short, we got through it. It wasn't pretty. And then, yeah, so for a while there, I slept on the office floor when it was myself, and then we figured out the kids and stuff, and I wound up basically becoming a professional house sitter. So I would go house sit, pet sit, and I'd be living in the homes wherever it was. And for the most part, I spent most of my time living for a week or 2 weeks. One lady in particular who had a wonderful dog, and she's a very interesting woman and very high strung, and her poodle was also very high strung. And I was like for some reason, I was the only person that could calm her poodle down.
Okay.
So she'd go off to Hawaii for a month and I'd live in the house and take care of the dog. But everybody else was like a week or a weekend or something like that. And I had arranged, we're kind of jumping, but I had arranged, especially on those weekends that I was going to have the kids, to have a place. So I would always be in some nice house or whatever, which was a little odd for the kids because we were always staying with dad.
Somewhere different, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then there was a couple of weekends that a place fell through or something weird happened like that. And I basically had called her up and said, hey, I don't have a spot for the kids this weekend. Can they stay with you or can we work something out? And so we'd swap a weekend or something like that. But then we had a weekend where things fell through and I wasn't able to get it fixed. And it was like the end of the month. I had zero money. At that time, I was on commissions and the way my pay came in and that kind of stuff it was a low spot. Couldn't get a thing, couldn't go rent a hotel or anything like that, rent an Airbnb, something like that. None of that was available. So I call her up and I'm like, hey, can we do this? She's like, nope, I have plans for the weekend, figure it out. And I don't think she was quite that harsh about it, but it was also a low time for her.
Yeah.
She was upset. Right. But it was like, sorry, figure it out. So I was like, oh, well, crap. So that's when we had to do what we referred to as office camping. So I brought the boys to the office. We had a projector in my computer and we set up. For them, it was amazing. They loved it. It was the biggest screen TV they had ever seen. They got to watch videos. They got to camp, sleep on the floor in tents, in sleeping bags, eat pizza. Like it was fun time for them. And the whole time, the entire weekend, I'm just seething, humiliated. Wow, that was a nice inflection. Humiliation, feeling humiliated, frustrated, angry at myself, angry at her, just all that stuff, and just swearing this will never happen again.
So that was an inflection point. But I love when I first heard this from you, when we had talked earlier, I was so impressed with it. Like, instead of saying, oh, we're homeless and we have to stay in the office, you make it into something positive for your kids. Hey, this is office camping.
Yeah.
And that you're able to show up as a great dad, even if you had all that stuff you just mentioned going on inside you.
Yeah.
You were able to compartmentalize that and show up as a great dad and have this wonderful experience that your boys will remember as office camping.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, I think I was wrong. I think that we wound up doing it a couple more times at different things. But once they had been like, oh, this was the funnest time ever, blah, 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 I was like, okay, if I have to, I can do this again.
Right.
Right.
So, but you said that was also a inflection point, because you said this is the only time this will happen to me. So what changed? What did you change in yourself, or what did God change in you, or however you want to say it? What happened at that time when you said, this is it, I'm turning a corner here?
I think it was a case of taking myself a bit more seriously.
Tell me more about what does that mean to you, taking yourself more seriously?
And we're gonna go deep back into the rabbit hole. So I was one of those kids who was a smart kid. My parents, my mom was an educator, my dad was an artist / businessman. better artist than businessman. And it was the mid 70s into the 80s. And mom was a big Dr. Spock fan because, right, that's just kind of how it was going back then. And so she was in my ear all the time with how smart I am, right? Because the Dr. Spock thing was, and if you were a kid in the 70s and the early 80s, it was tell your kids what you think, what you want them to be as if they already are, and they will be that.
Right. Right.
You're so smart. You're so charming. You're so right. Well, what we have found is that actually wasn't the greatest advice. And it set a fixed mindset on me about smart. And if you ever
open
read,
mindset, yeah.
Yeah. So if you ever read Mindset
Or
by
growth
Carol Dweck,
mindset, yeah.
Yeah.
What's her
And
name again? I talked to her.
Carol Dweck, Dweck.
Thank you.
And I ran into that years later, but years ago, like a decade or two ago, reading about some of the research that she had done. So we're bouncing all over the place here. But the short version is what they found is if you tell a kid you're smart, you're smart, you're smart, that kid sees evidence of that everywhere and is usually sailing through school and stuff like that, right up until around 5th, 6th grade or middle school. And then all of a sudden, things that were coming easy to them like this, because at that point, the school system starts to push them up to challenge them. Right? Because you want to give kids you want to keep them engaged, you want to challenge them. But a smart kid who knows they're smart and they identify as a smart kid, as soon as things start to be a challenge, they start backing off.
Yep.
Right. And I was textbook that kid. Right. So, things start being challenging. I start backing off going, well, if I ever actually applied myself to it, I could probably do great. But it doesn't really interest me that much. It's not really the thing. And when you do that, you sort of cut yourself off from a lot of opportunities. You're like, because you're afraid if you actually do apply yourself and it turns out to still be hard, that maybe you're not as smart as you've always been told you were or thought you were.
And this is your identity. If you are a smart kid,
yeah,
and you no longer are smart, that's like you're dying.
Yeah, absolutely. So in high school, I was that kid who was getting C's, right? I was getting C's in all my classes, but I was winning scholarships and gold medals at academic competitions.
Interesting.
Right. So I was the ringer on the academic decathlon team, right? I was the kid who you could slide in because for the big thing back then was academic decathlon. And it's not big. Popular kids probably don't know about it. But for us geeky kids, the academic decathlon, you had to have, your team had to be composed of a certain number of students with an A GPA, not a 3.5 to 4.0.
Right.
3.0 to 3.5 and below 3.0. Right. Well, I was the ringer. I was the guy who had a below 3.0 GPA, but just wiped the team with people. Right.
Right.
So that just reinforced I'm a smart kid. I don't have to work hard.
Right.
Right. And so what wound up happening is as I started cutting myself off from things as they were more difficult, I started not taking life terribly seriously. Oh, well, I'm still good at this. I'm still good at that. Right. And I was an introvert, so I love being on stage. I have built a great social skill set, but it exhausts me. Right. So I was like, well, I don't want to spend that energy, those types of things. So for a good chunk of my life, I'd basically kind of just gone where the opportunities sort of showed up, walked in, go, hey, actually, I'm good at this. Now, the problem with that is I walk into something that, oh yeah, I'm good at this. I know how to do this. I get bored real quick. Right. So the catch-22 was if I'm good at it, it's boring and I don't want to do it for very long. If I'm not good at it, I don't want to do it because it challenges who I am.
Right. Wow. So that's a pretty small box to put yourself in.
Yeah. Right. So it's like I can do things that I'm good at for a while until I get bored and then I want to go find something else to do. And then for some reason, nothing is ever challenging and life is kind of boring. So I don't take it very seriously.
Right. Okay.
This is a lot of,
So this is why when you said the transition was to start taking yourself more seriously, this is all the backstory of why you didn't take yourself seriously.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Now that's really interesting. And it's very thoughtful. I mean, it's obviously you've reflected on that. Yeah.
This was not a thing I realized at the moment.
Right.
At the moment, I think what I realized was this sucks. Life isn't easy. Like I'm not finding easy. Nothing's easy. So
which could come as a surprise to the smart kid.
Yeah.
Right.
So no one's going to come rescue me. That was another thing, right? I got rescued a fair bit here and there. So I am smart, but I've gotten myself in this situation where everything isn't easy. No one's going to come rescue me. I don't like this, which means I'm going to have to do something about it. And the things that I'm going to have to do about it are hard things, right? They're things that I'm not naturally good at. Or they're things that I've been avoiding because either I find them boring or beneath me or whatever, but it's time to fix my crap.
Right.
So that bumped things up a bit. Didn't fix everything, but I started doing a bit more of the things that I knew I needed to be doing. Started seeing a little bit more success in business
But that transition, and it's one I've heard from others as too,
Yep.
Josh, but it's starting to resonate with me, is that at some point you have to decide, hey, if it's in a sense, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. Like I have to do something about it. And I have
Yeah.
to be willing to go through things that are uncomfortable. If I want to create a life a certain way,
Mhm.
you know, if I want to do an Ironman, I have to do the training that is required to do an Ironman.
Yeah.
There's no getting around it. Whether I like
Yeah,
the training or
weirdly,
not,
you
if I want to do the
can't
Ironman, I
just
got to do it.
yeah, you can't just show up and be like, "Hey, look, on the podium, first time."
Right.
Right? No
Right.
work, no exercise, just I felt like I was gonna do this today.
So things are uncomfortable enough that you were like, okay, I need to change this. And
Mhm.
maybe for the first time in your life, you really got it that it's me that has to change.
Yeah.
It's not the circumstances. It's not, blaming somebody else. Like I have to do the hard work. I have to do the work, even if it's hard.
Yeah.
I've got to do it now.
Yeah. And I don't know that I got to that in that moment. I just knew in that moment I didn't want this anymore.
Right.
And I think it took me a while to figure out, like I was angry, right? And
Right.
so of course there was like, why couldn't she, you know,
Sure.
let me stay in the basement or something, like just whatever. And but it was also I'm intellectually honest enough even then, and by then I had started into working with coaching people. I had background that included counseling and some other stuff, and so the tools are there. And so one of the things that I complain about a lot is that I don't get to enjoy being angry.
Right.
I
Yep.
can be mad for like 5 minutes, and I can't even be mad for the full 5 minutes. But that's about as long as it lasts before I have to let it go, because the tools go to work immediately. Okay,
Right.
you're not angry,
Yep.
you're feeling angry. Why are you feeling
Right.
angry? Well, okay, maybe you had something to do with it. Like that,
Yeah.
they're always there, right? So I don't get to just, the world
Right.
sucks and it's their fault.
Don't get to marinate in it for too long.
Yeah, yeah. So I was upset, grumpy, trying to figure it out, but not taking it out on the kids. Like, I had to still smile and, hey, let's watch this movie now. And it's a real first world problem. I was sleeping in an office with my laptop, with the projector, with like all the tools. Okay, we're gonna watch
Right.
these movies on YouTube or Netflix or whatever. Like life sucked, but it didn't suck.
Yeah, no,
There are
for
people
sure.
around the world that'd be like, hey,
Several billion people around the world would trade
yeah,
places with you in a heartbeat.
absolutely.
Yep.
But I was pissed about it.
Sure. Yeah.
So at that point, I started kind of flailing around trying to figure out what to do.
So at that point, it's really just, I know I have to do something and I'm not going to have it like this again.
Yeah.
And then it was that you had the motivation, the discomfort to make you want to do something. And that was to figure it out. And how did you go about figuring it out?
I think mostly it was trying the things like, oh, here's a thing that I started a while ago and then abandoned because it started getting difficult. Is this the right thing? Let me try working on that a little bit. Hey, look, I'm starting to see some results with it. Or you know what? No results here. Okay, what about this thing over here that I tried 2 years ago? And so it was kind of like picking up the projects that I had not ever fully put myself into to see what would happen and see if it would go somewhere.
Yeah, but that's pretty brave because you're in a sense risking your identity on each one of those. But it was your life situation was uncomfortable enough that you were willing to do that at that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's worse for my identity, right? Okay, I'm going to start trying some things and challenging myself. Or, hey, I'm the homeless guy who lives in my office and can't figure out how to.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. Yep.
Because there's stories. You've got Les Brown and a lot of the motivational sales trainer speaker types from the 80s and 90s who wear that as a badge of honor. I slept in my office. I was like, for me, it's not really a badge of honor, right?
Yeah, normally those are guys that are workaholics and trying to be proud of being a worurkaholic. And they had a home, they just didn't go home to it because they were such a workaholic, which is not, again, something to be proud of.
Yeah, and sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's we were so broke that I was prioritizing this and change. Mike Michalowicz talks about how when he was running his first company, which is an IT company, he would sleep under the conference table desks of his clients' offices because he'd work overnight and then he'd sleep under that desk to save the hotel per diem, right? Because they were so things like that. That wasn't me. I just couldn't figure out how to make enough money to pay child support, feed myself, pay rent somewhere, be a grown up.
Right.
So I had to figure that out. And it took a while. Like it wasn't immediate to the point.
How many years, like from that nadir of your professional experience until you felt like maybe not where you are today, which I know is very successful financially, but where you felt like you had some normal life, let's say, how many years did that take?
Let me think. When was office camping? Office camping, I think, would have happened in 2013, I think. And then when I met the woman who is now my wife, Emma, I was still living in my office and professional house sitting. Didn't have to office camp with the boys. Had that built up enough where I was consistently in those places. I met her in 2014.
Okay.
In 2015, 2015 or end of 2014, somewhere in there, it's less than a year of being together. We moved in together into a place, which was I'd been working. I'd gotten a certain amount of income consistently coming in, to the point where I felt comfortable that I could cover my share of the rent, but it still sort of felt a little bit like a rescue.
Right. Right.
I didn't see it that way, but it was kind of the pattern sort of kicked in.
Mhm.
There's a deep breath. Now
So when did you come out of that feeling like it was a rescue, that you were back on your own feet?
When she kicked me in the teeth, I stepped at that point. Once we moved in there, shortly after that, I left working with the business coach. He and I had sort of partnered together. And when I say my office, it was actually the office he was paying the rent on.
Okay.
And so 2015, yeah, it was like summer of 2015, I stepped out of that. She and I were living together, and I stepped out of that and kind of stepped out on my own. Well, sorry, stepped out on my own and then was immediately approached by somebody else to come work with them.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I'll work with them for a while. I help them build a thing. They had told me they want to build this coaching company, that brand across across Canada, and maybe then eventually in the United States. And they want someone to help with it. So I was like, okay, cool. So I started doing that. It did not go the way that we expected.
Surprise,
And
surprise.
yeah, big shock. And for some reason, my income dried up again. Not
Okay.
completely, but a lot.
Right.
And Emma was basically carrying us at that point for a while. And we were both sort of tiptoeing around money because money stressed both of us out. And one day, like, we'd been living together for 10 months and our lease was a 1-year lease. And she said, I've talked to my parents. I've talked to the landlord. I'm moving out. I've prepaid the rent for the next 2 months. You can stay here, but I can't. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And it was everything that I had built emotionally, all of the things that I thought, okay, we're here. And I had settled into older patterns, right? I still wasn't driving as hard as I could or in the right directions that I wanted to do. I had some success. My clients were successful, but but we were kind of a mess, and we were eating through her savings.
Right.
And that was stressing her out. She's like, I just
Sure.
can't do this. And that was it. That was the final, like, no, I'm not walking away from this relationship. I'm not walking away from this woman. And the point is, I'm not walking away. She is. That can't happen.
Yep.
Right? And it was like, nope. At that point, I finally hit nothing else matters.
Right.
Whatever it takes to fix this, that's what I'm going to do.
Okay. So that was the beginning of that, when you were, camping in your office or office camping with your sons. And then with Emma, when she was like, when you realize that something that's the most important in your life is having key relationships you cannot do unless you have this handled, then it's time to get this handled no matter what.
Yeah. And so, like, I don't remember if I convinced her to stay for the 2 months or not. I don't remember living there by myself. But eventually we both moved out. She went, stayed with her parents for a while, and I found the crappiest, dirtiest, well, not dirtiest, but this crappy little basement suite. The people upstairs had well, actually, at the time they didn't have a dog. They had a little kid, but they were noisy. You could hear everything through the floor. Like, you had to duck to avoid hitting her. And Emma's 6'1", not quite 6'1". So it was dangerous for her because I had to duck sometimes. And it was one of those places where the main bedroom's off the kitchen.
Right.
And the only bathroom is off the kitchen. And then you have the kids' room. And it had to be 2 bedrooms because I had to have room for the kids to be there.
Yep. Absolutely.
It was terrible, like off urine yellow paint, just horrible.
You've never heard of that color before. Off urine yellow. That's amazing.
And it was $700 a month, which I could swing.
Right.
And so I prepaid the guy the first month and the whatever. And I had this commitment. I had to make this money. I had to take care of the kids, and I had to be able to do it in a way that didn't stress me out, to the point that I could be there and go get Emma.
And see, that's a part that I think is interesting, because a lot of people have probably gotten to that point. But then what they took away from it is, I got to make money at all costs. And whether it stresses you out, whether it takes your health, whether it robs you from the very relationship that you're trying to make money for, Like I've seen a lot of people go down that path. So how did you know the difference? Like, how did you have the wisdom at that point to say, okay, I have to do this. This is the most important thing. But the reason for it, the why, is to make sure I can have my good relationships and not for its own sake, and keep that in balance.
I think actually it wasn't I have to make money. It was this relationship is the most important thing.
Okay. Okay.
Part of having this relationship is having money.
Right. Okay. So
Being
you had
being
that in the
able to
right
take care of
order to
myself.
start with.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
It was her. It was my kids. I needed money for these things. I needed to start showing up.
Right.
I went to the guys that I was working with and said, hey, this isn't working. I need to do something on my own. They were like, okay. I did that. So that's when I kind of was 100% completely on my own and started just going out. And basically every conversation I had was, what are you working on? Great. Do you want help with that?
Right.
Here are the things that I have where I can help you with that. And sometimes it was business stuff. I had a lot of experience with family run businesses, things like that. And so a lot of times it was helping people with their business. Sometimes it was helping them with their family relationships because,
Right.
like you say, they were completely 100% in the business. And it was like, how do I balance these things? Except they never asked, how do I balance these things? It was, how do I keep my business successful without losing my family?
Right.
Right.
Right. To be honest.
It's like,
Yeah, that's
well,
right.
let's start by changing the order of priority. How do I keep my family without my business crashing? How about that?
But so you did everything from sort of relationship counseling to strategic business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And which was all stuff I had been doing anyway, but
Okay.
I wasn't like, I got to do just this or just that or just this. It was, if I talked to you and we would talk about, I had a lot of coffee conversations, like just sitting down with somebody 15, 20, half an hour and being like, what's going on in your world? What's up? And then, is there a way I can help you with that? Or, you know what? I think there's a way I can help you with that. Would you be interested in talking about it?
Right.
And
Right.
doing that, I didn't have a system. I didn't have it. It was just, this is what I fell into. And that turned into it turned into enough revenue that when it turned out that I needed to move out of we called it the dog house because the people upstairs got a dog and then they got divorced. And the guy stayed in the place with this puppy and he would go out and work all day. And he worked like 8, 10, 12 out, not 8, like 10, 12-hour days. And that dog would be howling the entire time he was gone. And so wound up having to leave that place. It turned into a really ugly situation really fast. Wound up having to break the lease, pay for a couple of months that I wasn't there,
Right.
find another place that was like double the monthly rent,
Right.
but had built to where I could go do that.
Right.
Emma had wound up actually hitting her head. She got in a really bad concussion. Her original plan had been to stay with her parents for a while and then move into a place of her own. And got in this really bad concussion, couldn't. And her parents were at the point where like, hey, and bless them, they didn't mean it this way, but it came across kind of as, aren't you better yet? Like, why can't you come downstairs and get your own food?
Right.
Kind
Right.
of things. And so she needed help and support. So she wound up basically moving back in with me unofficially at the doghouse. I would go pick her up. She'd come stay for a little while, take her back.
Right.
And then when I moved out of the doghouse to the other place, because she couldn't handle the dog howling, things like that, we called it Sarah's basement. It was another basement suite. It was a step up though. It was lovely basement wood paneling, right? That kind of thing. But it was a nicer place, paid a little bit more for it. And Emma was basically living in the bedroom, trying to recover from this concussion. Again, we were having terrible medical advice at that point. It was still stay in a dark room until you don't have symptoms kind of thing. But that it contributed to the improving / saving of our relationship. And it wasn't because she didn't have anywhere to go. We had driven around and talked a bunch about some things. And it was one of those things, you know what, let's give this thing another shot, keep it going. Because I've proven that I can actually, when I actually give a crap,
Right.
I can
When you
actually
take
get off
yourself
my butt.
seriously, when you're willing to work hard, when you're willing to be uncomfortable, that you can add value and get rewarded for it.
Yeah. And do it for myself, not just all of my clients. Like I had clients I was taking from $8 million to $36 million a year in revenue. Like
Wow.
I was having those types of successes
Right.
while I was living in the doghouse or the basement, right? Those types of things.
So then you still weren't taking yourself fairly seriously, like in a fair way. Because if you'd been taking yourself seriously in a fair way, you would have been having, you would have been making more revenue from those clients that were doing so well as well.
Probably. Yeah. Yeah, probably. I didn't, it was another one of those cases where cobbler's kids have no shoes, right? Like I can look at a business, I can look at a person in a business and go, here's where you're at. I can ask the right questions, help them see what's going on, both in the business and in themselves and in their relationships. So that's 3 things. But in all those situations, then go, have you considered this? Maybe you want to do that. Here's the set of tools that you might want to consider, and watch them, take off and run and be happy as a clam. But for me, it was like, this is basic stuff, right? I'm the smart guy, but you forget as the smart guy that other people don't know things that you do.
Right. Right.
So it'd be like, why would I charge somebody to sit down with them for an hour? Like, you pay for the coffee. That's a fair charge. And then I just gave you advice that adds $1 million in revenue to your business over the next 12 months.
Right. Right.
Right. And for me, I'm like, why would I charge for that? That's just basic stuff. He should know that. He could have found this in any book, or she could have Googled it. Right.
Right.
So that's a thing that a lot of coaches and consultants have to deal with a lot, is that realization that there's value to what you're doing.
And when did that shift for you, Josh? When was the transition when you went from sort of like, because I mean, I've definitely felt that, right? Like, and I probably, like you said, probably a lot of people in the industry have, but like, from saying, hey, I don't know why I want to pay for this because it's just common knowledge, to I have something that's really value and it really adds a lot of value, and it's worth for them to share some of that value with me.
Well, I think I felt that it was worth them sharing some value with me. I think when the big 2x4 to the head hit was when I had gone to work with the guy, and it was actually more of it wasn't quite an employee thing. It was a contract sort of thing. But it was kind of a weird hybrid client/contractor kind of thing, where I was supposed to be coaching him and helping him with stuff, but also doing some stuff. So doing some consulting stuff. And he was paying me at the time, I thought, pretty well, more than he'd paid anybody else ever who'd worked for him. And he wasn't comfortable with that, but I thought, well, I'm worth it.
Right.
Because I saw what was going on.
Yeah.
And he had that mindset of, well, he had a history of, he had taken this company through bankruptcy, like reorganizational bankruptcy.
Right.
I forget what chapter that is in the US, where they didn't go completely out of business. They just reorganized the debt, that kind of stuff. Brought it back up and had just kept hitting this ceiling and could just never quite get it over the hump, right? For like 15 years.
Oh, wow.
But he was very proud of the fact that he had saved this company numerous times and gone out and raised money, like, right, all these things. And I'm there, and basically he's asking me to do things. I'm like, it's not gonna help. That's actually a step backwards. Or asking me to do things that were not in the original, like, that's not why you brought me in here.
Right.
And I would watch him have meetings with people and say things and do things and make decisions. And I'm just like, that's not the way that's not going to get what you've told me you want.
Right.
And sometimes it was the opposite of things that he and I had agreed on and stuff like that. And I lost my professional cool on him at one point, right after we'd had a meeting with some people, a company we were working with in Israel, I think, somewhere in that area of the world, probably Israel. And he had gone a completely different direction from what we had talked about just before the meeting. Like, this is what we agreed on. This is what we're going to do. And he goes off in a different direction. And I stood up and I don't know if I pushed my chair in hard or something that was obviously that I was
drew some attention. Yeah.
Yeah. And he called me out. He's like, what's going on? What are you? And I just lost. I was like, dude, this is what you tell me you want. This is the things that you like. You're completely ignoring. You're paying me more money than you've ever paid anybody in your life before. And you're ignoring half of what I tell you.
Right.
Right. And that got into we kind of calmed that down a little bit, and I walked out, and then a couple of days later he took me out for lunch and we chatted about it some more and realized, you know what, this is looking like it's not actually a good fit. And I knew in that conversation that if he wanted to change this, I was worth every penny, plus he'd given me options on the back end.
Right.
He'd offered me options on the back end. And he thought, when he'd offered the option at the back end, he thought I was going to come in and be the workaholic 80-hour a week, like him, savior of the company.
Right.
Kind of thing. And I'm like, no. The options on the back end, that's what I'm getting for giving you a discount and working for you as many hours.
Right.
I don't work for my clients, right? I work with them for a certain number of hours. Like, you're getting me like almost 40 hours a week here. Like, you're costing me. I'm making less money but it's consistent, right? So I'd made decisions and reasons to be there, but that during that conversation, during that time, was about a 2-week period that we had the sort of conversation going on before we decided, you know what, we need to go. It was that realization that I don't need to come down off of what I'm doing. I don't need to be putting in more effort and more energy to earn the money that he's paying me. He needs to be listening to what I'm telling him and doing the things that I'm telling him if he wants to get the value.
Right.
And so that was a big deal. As far as I'm not $100 a meeting kind of guy.
taking yourself seriously.
Yeah. Right. It's along that process.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was.
And have you found in your business since then, in your clients that you're dealing with, Josh, is there a correlation between how much you charge them and how much they listen? If they pay you more, do they listen better or not?
Most of the time, yes, not
Okay.
always.
Okay.
Every once in a while, there is that exception to the rule that, the way I'll basically do it is 80% of my clients are going to pay full rate. And then I have what I call, actually it's more than 80%, but I have what I call my subsidized slots, where if somebody looks like they're absolutely a great fit for working with me, I know I can do a great job with them, but they're just not quite at that cash flow level yet. And one of the first things we're going to fix is cash flow.
Right.
Then I will do a sub. And if I've got enough full paying clients that I can afford to donate the time, I'll say, okay, what can you pay? What's a little bit uncomfortable, but we can make it work.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do that, and we'll agree to do that for like 90 days. And then we'll turn that at the end of the 90 days. We'll see how far have you come. We'll
right, when
renegotiate.
you have your cash flow right, and then you can pay full price after that.
Yeah.
So sometimes those guys listen even better, but it sounds like as a percentage of what they have, what they can afford, it's still maybe higher than
Yeah.
the other clients.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that.
So in some ways, you're doing your clients better service. You're serving your clients better by charging them more so that they'll also listen better.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, you'll talk to consultants and people in the coaching and consulting space, and they'll kind of toss that off very cavalierly, right? They got to have skin in the game or they won't listen, or it's got to hurt enough that they're going to pay attention, that kind of thing. And it can seem kind of callous. And some guys, they're just justifying, well, I just want to charge $5,000 a month, right? For 2 hours, for two 1 hour calls. And it's like, well, but what's the value? Like, what do you get?
Right.
So you do have to look at what they get out of it, but there needs to be some level of connection to the pain point.
Right. Right.
Often I find that, especially at higher revenue levels, those guys, the pain point isn't the money. The pain point's the time.
Right. Right.
And they're like, I just want results. I don't care what it costs me.
Right.
I want results, and I'm only going to be able to give you 5 hours a month.
Right.
Can you get me these results? I'm like, well, I can't get you anything.
Right.
But if we work together, I can help you get.
Right. Right.
Right. Right. So.
Okay, so that's a long answer to but it's lots of interesting wisdom in
Have
there.
we answered your first question?
But but I think as far as taking yourself more seriously, I mean, that's what we were talked about when you made that first point. And then you had that the second time when you said, okay, this, if it's, if I wrote the notes down right, I'm going to have to do something about it, right? There's not anybody else who's going to rescue me. I'm going to have to do something about it. So those really drove this transition from, what started as a divorce, and then how to step up in your life to become who you can be, right? To be willing to go through the discomfort, to build the muscles, to be able to do the things that you want to be able to do. Yeah. So there's one other one that if you're okay to talk about, and if not, we cut this out, but we talked about earlier about losing your mom, quote unquote, when you were young, and how that affected you as well. And I know that's, something that I think a lot of people can relate to, and maybe get stuck in being the victim to that, or how to overcome that, even if it's very difficult, even if it's very traumatic. And I know your situation's unique in the sense that that's why I did the quotes on losing your mom. But if you're comfortable to share a little bit about that, that also might be very useful with our listeners. Sure. So we can go through short version. So my mom wore the pants in the family. She was the driving force of the family. Dad was great. Love him. He's still alive. He's still a great guy. And so is mom, actually. Still alive. Not a great guy. But mom was a teacher. She was one of the top teachers in the state of Alaska. She had single-handedly, her and a partner, gone out and written for and received the largest educational grant from one of the largest educational organizations in the world to do this thing. And normally people who are applying for that grant bring in teams of lawyers and accountants and stuff. And it was her and one other teacher, and wrote it to the point that because she got it, they had her come and tour around different universities to talk about how to grant. Like, mom was good. And she was driving, her kids were going to be successful. Her kids were smart, like that kind of stuff. And they adopted me. And then they had 2 girls after, each 2 years apart, roughly 2 years apart. So they had the 3 kids, and mom was that person. And then, how old was I? 12, I think, when mom suddenly started having to go to the hospital for something. And we didn't really know what it was. And dad was kind of figuring it out. We got to hang out with grandpa for a while, and grandma, those types of things. And then it was sit everybody down and explain that mom has disease, and it is not going well,
and she's probably not going to die, but she's going to be very different. And what it had turned out was mom had MS, and this was 89, I think. No, 88, 89, somewhere in there. Yeah. And it had gone from her left foot tingling to needing a cane to walk to being in a wheelchair full time with complete loss of short-term memory and a radical personality shift.
Wow.
And that took less than 18 months.
Wow.
It was the fastest progressing case of MS they had ever seen to that point, to the point they asked if they could biopsy her brain.
Wow.
And that didn't go well. Dad was complete wreck and was like, well, they're like, this will help us with other people. It's this is a once in a lifetime case, an opportunity. Can we? And he's like, well, I guess if it'll help. And then of course her family was like, you just gave them permission to drill into her brain. And like, so that went sideways quickly, and that got taken back. And so they didn't, and a bunch of other stuff. But so I was 89, what, 12, 13 years old. And the rock of the family had basically become the equivalent of a petulant 12-year-old in a wheelchair.
Right. Wow.
And so dad, poor guy, he was lost. He didn't check out. He still showed up. He still tried to, right. But he was lost. She was his rock.
Right.
And
not like she was for the whole family.
Yeah. She controlled the well, she didn't control. She ran the finances. She knew, like, he didn't know stuff. Right. And so he was an artist temperamentally, like, anyway. He lost his best friend, all of that. And so I'm the smart kid. And all of a sudden I start getting, because she was well known through school and that kind of stuff, I start getting concern and pity sort of things. Not really pity, but you've got teachers that knew her that see me coming up, trying to reach out and treat me weird and different. And I'm like, what's going on? And I didn't like it. And I'm the introvert and blah, blah, blah. So that kind of led to the more of the putting up of walls and shields and just saying, I don't want to do that thing that's hard. And everybody had told me at the time, well, you don't have to.
Oh, right.
You've got enough other hard stuff going on.
Okay.
Right.
So this sort of patted yourself, if you will, or delayed your need to come to that point where you did finally in the transition to say, I have to do something about it.
Yeah. And I mean, and I was whenever I did engage, I was proving I could do things really well. And it would get to a point where, okay, Joss, if you don't do these 5 projects and these 3 tests in the next 2 weeks, you're going to fail my class. If you do these things, I can give you a C. Knock them out, do them, get the C, right? All right, I passed, keep going. Like it was that kind of thing. And I wasn't I wasn't the best support for my dad. Like I did everything I could to not be in the house.
Right? Just to run away from the pain, so to speak.
Yeah, well, yeah, because mom was there and it was not... There was a lot, and we don't have enough time, but there was a lot, and it was tough to deal with. So I just spent as much time as I could either reading books. Like I read fantasy and science fiction novels all the time as a kid, and Tom Clancy. Escapism, right? Just
right.
If I was in my book, I didn't have to deal with whatever else was going on.
So if you look back on that situation now, what's something that you learned or something you would pass along for, somebody else who's going through a very difficult illness or loss of a parent?
I don't know what I would say to someone else because I try not to. I'd probably ask questions. I will say this, for those who might be beating themselves up about stuff like that. Wayne Dyer had a great phrase that he used to use a lot, which was, it's 2-parter. And people usually cut you off after the first half, the 2 parts. So the first half is, I am where I am in life, right? Or I am where I am right now, solely as a result of the decisions that I have made thus far. If you stop there, you get 2 responses. You get, that's bullshit.
Right.
I didn't ask to be in the car when the drunk driver hit it. I didn't ask to be this. I didn't make the decision to this. Like, well, actually, if you made the decision to get in this car, you made the decision to hang out with these people, you made it right. But everybody's like, no, I won't take blame for that. It's about blame, right? The other response you get from that first half is, you're right. I make terrible decisions. I am terrible at making decisions. I'm an unsuccessful loser.
Yeah, I'm horrible. You go into a lot of shame.
Which is still blame. But it's blame of self. So either if you stop at that first half of, I am where I am solely as a result of the decisions I've made at this point in life, you're blaming. You're either blaming other people and deflecting it away from you, or you're blaming yourself. Either one is not good.
Right.
Which is why the second half exists, which is, and I have always made the best decisions I knew how to make at the time.
Right.
When you put them together, you can take responsibility without taking blame.
Right.
Or without, right.
And without even needing to place blame at all on yourself or anybody else.
Exactly. Right. And so, and the one of the subtle parts of that is, you've always made the best decisions you knew how to make at the time. Doesn't mean you didn't know there were better decisions, right? as I say a lot, very few people in the Western society think that cigarettes are healthy, right? They
Yeah.
know that the better choice is probably not to smoke them for the vast majority of people.
But it doesn't mean they could make a better decision at that time,
Right. They don't know how
even
to
if
make
they know that
one.
information. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you do that, the other thing that Dyer would say is, so if you look at people and you realize that everybody's making the best decisions they know how to make at the time, everybody's doing the best they know how, you really can't get mad at them for not doing better.
Right. Right.
Right. You can't blame them for not doing better. You can make an effort to try to show them how to make better decisions, either making them aware of those decisions first, or just helping them build that muscle of turning right here instead of turning left all the time.
Right. Right.
And so that, I think, for me, like looking back, I still have those moments in the shower. I had one this morning in the shower where you're just like, oh, I can't believe I was so stupid. Or I can't believe I said those things or did those things then. Like, couldn't I have? And it's like, you know what? Take a deep breath. You made the best decisions you knew how to make at the time.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
Doesn't mean there weren't better ones, clearly.
Right.
But if you hadn't made those decisions, you wouldn't be here. If I hadn't made the decisions that led to my ex-wife deciding that she didn't feel safe in our marriage, she didn't feel secure in our marriage, and that she needed something else, I would not be married to Emma today.
Right.
Living in the house that we live in, planning the adventures that we're planning together with the clients that I have, doing the stuff that I love doing with two teenage boys who are great. Like, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have the pains that I have now. I'd have different pains.
Right. Right.
And I'm sure I would love the life. Well, I'm not sure I would love the life, but it's entirely possible that I would love whatever that life would be that it would have led to. But I'm pretty fond of this one.
Right. As well.
My wife is the most important person on the planet for me.
Right.
My kids are right behind her.
Right.
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 And I love the fact that I can be here for them. I want to be here more for them, do more for them, which is why I'm, do what I do and help others to do it. But if I hadn't made the decisions I knew how to make, I wouldn't be where I am today, for better or for worse.
That's right. That's right. And that's such a powerful release, both for ourselves and for others, as you said. Right. And then the third part to that one, maybe Wayne Dyer didn't say, is, and I can choose differently going forward. Right. Because I acknowledge that I am where I am because of the choices I've made, then I can choose something else going forward if I want to. Right. And here's also the freedom. Power. I don't have to. Right. As you said, I don't have to. Right. But I can. So if you think about, if I bring us back to what you said was the biggest transition, and now I understand why, was the divorce, because it turns out it wasn't just a divorce. It was the divorce, and it was this transition into, I'll say it, becoming a man, in a sense, becoming a fully, actualizing yourself as a human being, right? To be able to step up and taking responsibility for your life.
Yeah.
In that vein, two last questions. First is there anything that you would do differently? If you look back now, is there anything, if you could go back, to that, 2010 timeframe, is there something that you would tell yourself that that you would do differently going back, or would you do it the same? Is there something you would change?
It's tough to say yes after the conversation if I hadn't made the decision.
Absolutely. I mean, you have the great life that you love, and you love that life, which is the right thing to do, whether it could be different or not. And maybe it's not a different life, but is there anything that you would have, grasped sooner or changed? Or
I think the biggest thing is not really my relationship directly at all, but it has to do with her second husband. He turned out to be, and part of why she and I have as good a relationship as we do now is by comparison. He turned out to be not a good dude.
Right.
And he was abusive to her. He was abusive to my kids, and they kept it from me. And there were little sort of warning signs and the boys would tell me about some things, and then she would say, when I talked to her about it, she'd say, yeah, this, but da 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 da, or like, and I was very much, it's her life, it's her relationship. I didn't realize the extent of what was going on. It's probably good that I didn't, because I'd rather not be in jail right now. But I feel like there's that dad man part of you that is just like, my job includes protecting my kids.
Right.
And I didn't fully succeed at that. Like, that feels like a fall down for me.
But that's in some sense, if I can put words in your mouth, Josh, that's seems to me as part of taking yourself more seriously. Like, if I could say that to other guys, is like, trust your dad instinct.
Yeah.
And if something doesn't seem right, follow up on it and be curious and be passionate, and don't kill somebody. We're going to end up in jail, but take actions if you have a sense that something's not right, then take those actions.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that, man. And that's something I think, I mean, I know I've had times with that. Like, am I doing the right by my kids? Am I doing, what's the right situation here? But to not be afraid to dig into something, better to look like an ass yourself and have your kids protected than vice versa.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. No, I really appreciate that. Coming back around to the transition that you made, for stepping up in your business and saying, I made a decision that it's got to change, and I'm the one that has to do something about it. And what you've created now, that you have this great life, and your kids is, despite whatever else was going on, your kids are doing great. Your wife is doing great. You're living in a great home and have a great business where you're really helping other people. What's the one tool, if you could take the one, it can be more than one, but I really try to make it simpler and something that people can carry away from this. So what's one tool that you would recommend? What's one action from your experience that you would recommend to listeners going through that transition of really stepping up and taking responsibility for their lives? And what's one tool that you would give them that they could start applying today to make a difference in their life?
There's a few, but I think the one that I usually default to, because I think it's the strongest, is number one, remember that you are where you are in life solely as a result of the decisions you made to this point, and that you've always made the best decisions you knew how to make at the time, and then figure out how to make better ones if you want things to change.
Right.
But also is this one. It's the question, is it true?
Tell me more about that.
And this is another Wayne Dyer tool.
So I would say Wayne Dyer sounds like Byron Katie to me, but
so, well, it may have come from that. So this was during his Tao Te Ching phase. So basically, what it is this: and any belief that you have, any excuse that you have, it comes from his book Excuses Be Gone. So any excuse that you have or belief that you have, ask yourself the question: is it true? Like, I can't do that because my parents will lose their mind.
Right.
Okay? Is it true? Now, it's a yes or no question. The only way you can answer yes is if it is 100% utterly factual, cannot change. There is 0% chance of anything else.
And all the time.
And all the time. Yep. So I can't do this because my parents will disown me. Is it true? Well, it's theoretically possible that they might not, right? Okay, great. Now we have a split. We have two potential possibilities. Yeah. We have my parents will disown me, or we have the opposite of that. My parents will absolutely approve of whatever it is, or my parents will support me in this decision, right? Two opposite things. Both of them have a chance to be true and a chance to be false.
Right.
You now have the choice to act as though one of them is true. Pick one. The suggestion is pick the one that will let you move forward and go with that. It's simple. It's simplistic almost, right? And is it 100%? No. Like, you decide, okay, my parents will absolutely support my decision to take their grandchildren, live in another country, 12 time zones away. They'll completely be fine with that. I'm going to act as if that's true. There is still a good possibility that they will lose their minds.
Right.
And be unhappy with it. But you can deal with that.
Right.
As opposed to deciding that they're going to lose their minds and that they'll disown you and that they'll never, your kids will never get to know their grandparents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and just let that paralyze you and never make the decision.
Yeah.
And then regret it for the rest of your life.
No, I like that very much. I like that. That's really good. I really like that. I was thinking about, there's a podcast, episode 7 that I released that has some information in it from my childhood that is going to be uncomfortable for my parents. And when I called them on Sunday, it's been out there for a week. And when I called them on Sunday, I had the thought like, oh, my parents are going to be upset with me.
Yeah.
Right. And then I thought, wait a minute. And not only are they going to be upset with me, I was already starting to defend myself, position myself, take the stance of, okay, they're going to be upset with me, and here's my justification on why it was right, type of thing.
Yeah. Here's my preemptive strike on
exactly.
that.
All because I had made it up in my mind that this was what's going to be true. And so I was reflecting on this, and then, well, for better or for worse, I hadn't listened to it, which is fine. And then I thought, well, so I told him, I said, if this is, there's some content in here that you might not like, so you might not want to listen to it. Mm-hmm. It's your choice, right? But I pulled myself back from, okay, I'm going to have my relationship with my parents is going to be ruined because of this situation, which is where I could have easily gone. And that's not true in all cases all the time, 100% clearly. So I really like that. I did that process without even realizing it, but I love that question. So I really appreciate that, Kurt. And I think our listeners will find that very useful. So I'm really, really grateful for you joining me today. And I just said curve. Why did I say curve? Sorry, Joss.
I didn't hear curve, but okay.
Oh, well, in my head, that's what I heard. But anyway, I really appreciate it, Joss, very much. I really love your vulnerability. I love your openness to share some very private things with you, some very tender things that also I hope everyone can learn from.
Yeah,
So
well, I hope so too.
I really honor that in you, and that really inspires me. And
Thanks.
I love, the couple of the takeaways that you had, about I'm going to have to do it myself. At some point, I'm going to have to do it myself. Like that. There's no one else who can do my push-ups.
Yeah.
And then I have to do that. And then I love this, what you shared, the two things from Wayne Dyer, who I actually had the chance to meet some years ago in Michigan. And, really, really great. I'm here because the choices I made the best choices I can. I think that gets lost in a lot of people's thinkings, and I can choose differently going forward. And then finally, if something's stopping me, ask if it's true, if it's really true 100% of the time. So thank you so much. I wanted to hear a little bit like where you have obviously a very, very interesting life. I do think for this episode, we will name it Life is Transition, because yours has been continual transition.
Yeah.
Where can people find out more about you and what you're working on right now?
Fastest way to find me is my website, josswillard.com. That's where I have my stuff, where I help business owners who are transitioning or want to transition out of their business, so that they're not those workaholics that are constantly, in the business. They can actually go spend time with their families and not worry about, is the business going to fall apart while they're gone.
That sounds like a great service.
Yeah. So, and that's where I use all these tools. Like Wayne Dyer, I got into reading his stuff because I needed it professionally, right? It's all that kind of fun stuff. Yeah, the easiest way to find me, josswillard.com. I'm on most of the social medias as Joss Willard or at Joss Willard.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your story and how life has been for you and all the transitions you've been through. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I love having good conversations with people. It's fun.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Even if it wasn't for everybody else, this is good for me. So thank you.
I can't wait to hear what action